This is the Living in Mid-Bloom podcast, lighthearted and heartfelt conversations about what it looks like to live, heal, and blossom in middle age. I'm your host, April Pruitt. Let's get our bloom on. In this episode, I talk about emotional difficulties and suicide. Please do not listen to this episode if you believe any of these subjects may trigger you. The contents of this episode is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek guidance from your healthcare professional. Hello, my mid-bloomers, and thank you for joining me today. I have a guest for this episode. I interviewed Jo Barr. The interview was done several months ago, so you'll probably notice that when you listen to part of the conversation. It took place probably around Christmas or so. But anyway, Jo is a lot like me. We have a lot of similarities. We're both survivors of childhood trauma. We are both creative spirits. And I think part of the survival, the way we survive, partly by, I think, being curious about our lives and trying to understand what happened and what do we need to do to create a safe space for ourselves and for others. So, Jo, where are you from?
I'm originally from Washington, D.C. My parents met in the Navy, so I was born out there. I was conceived in the Navy.
And then, you're a military brat.
Kind of.
Okay.
I didn't travel around at that point, but I lived in New York City, Fresh Meadows, Queens, until I was, 2 or 3, and then my family moved out to Colorado. So I grew up here. As an adult, I lived also in Arizona and Tempe and Chicago for 4 years.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I used to live in D.C. in my 20s. I lived there for about 13 years, and I love it. But it's so expensive to live there.
Is it?
Yeah, it is. It's just both coasts. It's just expensive. So what I want to do is kind of talk about your background, but also we're going to get to what you're doing now and your Hell to Happiness coaching program. So growing up in DC and a few other places, tell me about your family life, because my trauma was sexual abuse and emotional abuse.
I can tell you, April, you're not alone. I was molested when I was 3. My main abuser, though, it was violence. I grew up in childhood violence. My father was a rageaholic with, I believe, untreated mental health. He was a very sick man. He loved me. He just wanted to control me so bad that he couldn't control his rage. So,
and you're just a child. You don't even understand. And only a child can be who they are until they're told they can't. And I know my response was just freezing. What was your response to this violence? Was it trying to appease them, people pleasing?
It was at first, the people pleasing when I was a little girl. When I was a teenager, it was a different story. I was really out of control. I was punk rock, new wave, gothic, you name it.
Expressing yourself.
I was pissed off as a teenager. I was ticked off over how I was treated.
Yeah. When
I was in elementary school, I was so super self-conscious that, you know how when you walk, you kind of wave your hands? I was so super self-conscientious about that it was painful. It was like walking on pins and needles through my childhood. It felt like even when I was on the playground that at any minute a landmine was going to explode in my face. I just didn't know when. So I was very hypervigilant even as a child, as you can imagine.
I can understand that when, you're so busy trying to not make a move that would be upsetting or catch anybody's attention. And so you didn't even, not even comfortable in your own skin at that age. It's devastating. It's devastating. I so appreciate your honesty around this. How did your mom fit into the family dynamics?
Well, she was basically a battered housewife.
Mm,
She didn't believe in herself enough to take us out of that situation. She didn't believe she would make it without my dad, is my guess. I don't
mm,
know for sure. But
sure.
I just remember her promising us that she was going to take us away to our own apartment. And then at the end of the day, they would make up and she would be like, nothing's wrong. Everything's great. Everything, the whole Pollyanna thing.
Yeah.
And that really messed with me too, because it invalidated what I saw and what I experienced. So I
Mm-hmm.
went through part of my adulthood not trusting myself and my
Right.
own reality. But I love my parents. I know that
Yeah.
that experience would not have made me the strong person I am today.
How long did it take you to get there? Because it took me a long time.
Oh, yeah. Took me a long time too. It was a process, I'm still a work
Yeah.
in progress.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 53. My
Okay.
20s were pretty horrendous as far as my emotional life was concerned. I was diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder when I was 21. I had a
Okay.
severe manic episode in San Francisco.
Tell me about that. And I'm curious, the person that made the diagnosis, was this like one of the first therapists you spent time with? Because I know I've gone through 6 or 7 therapists through the years,
Mhm.
and some were terrible. One I actually successfully sued because they weren't properly licensed. So talk
Wow.
about another minefield that children and adult survivors are dealing with, is trying to find trustworthy people. But then I
Mhm.
think, is our radar off because we don't know what a trusting adult is?
Sure. I've been in therapy basically from when I was 21 after I had that manic episode to currently. I took maybe a year or two off, but I've had my
Mm-hmm.
share of really crappy therapists. I've had my share of extraordinary people too.
Mm. Yeah.
To answer your question, I was hospitalized in Berkeley, California, having this severe manic episode that I never had before. The doctors thought I was schizophrenic because I was hallucinating, I was
Oh.
delusional. They were medicating me for schizophrenia, which I didn't have. So my parents went out there, flew me back to Denver with me, and we checked into a hospital here in Colorado. And the psychiatrist diagnosed me with bipolar 1, which
Mm.
was completely accurate because I went through a number of different manic episodes in my 20s. And the higher you go, the harder you fall, kind of thing. So I spent a lot of time in very deep, dark depressions too.
Mm. So explain, what is bipolar one? What does that mean?
Bipolar, no matter if it's bipolar 1 or bipolar 2 or unspecified,
Mm-hmm.
basically you have a chemical imbalance in your brain and you were born with it. And it really contributes to moodiness, dysregulation emotionally.
Mm.
The bipolar 1 is the one that goes into psychosis, where you have the manic episodes that fly off the rail.
Mm.
Bipolar 2 is more depression. Their manias are what's called hypomania, which is where they feel good and they feel energized, but they don't go off the rails.
Okay.
My process is all three, which the society's stigma really impacted me staying on my medication because
Yeah.
I wanted to prove to the world and to myself that I wasn't crazy. So I
Yeah.
would get my medication, and within months, I'd be back in the hospital.
When you say that, even now, that stigma, when I've seen a therapist a few years ago, and I asked him a question I already knew the answer to, but still I said, "Am I mentally ill?"
Mm,
And he said, "Yes." But it didn't mean that, oh my God, that is just what it is. It's just a diagnosis of whatever you've gone through, however you were born. It's just a matter of working on getting healthy, just like your body and everything else. But you're so right that stigma is alive and well. And we look at the current population of teenagers and know how they're suffering. So, what were you doing as far as work in your 20s?
In my 20s, I was doing odds and ends. And then when I turned 23, one of my dreams as a little girl was to travel around the world, get to
Mm.
the other side of the world, right? When I was 24, I signed in on a Continental Airlines project at a outsourcing firm. And then a year later, I got on with United Airlines, which I
Oh,
stayed with for 14 years as a international service director in reservations.
wow. That sounds like a fun job.
It was high stress and high strung, but I really thrived. And the best part, you know what? Free flights.
Oh, yeah. No
So I've been
kidding.
all over the world
Oh,
by
wow.
the grace of God. My first trip out of the country was to Australia. I've
Oh,
been since that, and I was 25 in 1995. And I've been to Hong Kong, Thailand a couple times, Bali, Indonesia. I
oh,
worked
wow.
for 4.5 months in India on an outsourcing project. I've been to Argentina, Italy,
Wow.
Canada, a lot, big handful of places.
That's
And I just love it.
amazing.
Oh, I love to travel.
Wow. So that we understand. So your time in Australia, what exactly, was the job? This understanding, what were you actually doing?
Well, first, I started out doing North American sales as a reservation agent. And
Okay.
then I moved to international. And then I became what's called a service director, which means I helped my colleagues on the floor decipher fare rules, help them navigate the computer system. When disgruntled passengers wanted to talk to a supervisor, I
Mm-hmm.
was it. So I
Okay.
really had to be creative on creating win-win situations for both the company and the passenger. And there were
Okay.
a lot of really difficult situations, as you can imagine,
Mm-hmm.
that,
Yeah.
mistakes on our part, mistakes on other airlines, and just
Yeah.
getting things fixed in
Right.
creative ways. So,
Right. When you're trying to, people are complaining, there are customers, and you're a resolution specialist. It's basically is how do we get out of this and everybody's happy. So,
exactly. Yeah.
this is interesting when you talked about how tough your 20s were, but you had this, I mean, like you said, stressful job and all this traveling. How did that affect you? I mean, do you think that that job was a positive impact versus the emotional things that you were dealing with?
It really was, because it got me out of my head. It got me out of my trauma. I was totally present in the places that I went. I was discovering new ways of life. These temples at these in Thailand,
Mm,
everywhere, gold, the just wandering around, meeting local people and experiencing new ways of life. It was like God put me into the present moment,
wow.
where most of my life I've spent just drudging up the past and being stuck in a rut and like a
Mm-hmm.
broken record. And I'm a recovering sex addict, and my addiction started to take off when I was traveling, because
Okay.
I find men from other cultures very attractive to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
exotic, I like the exotic look and the different
Mm-hmm.
accents, and I just love culture.
Yeah.
I was in Hong Kong and I was very depressed. I was crying. It's just like my emotional, when I wasn't totally present, I was emotionally just driven by some depression that I had going on. I
Mm-hmm.
discovered on that trip that sex cures depression. Like, I had an affair with a
Okay.
businessman from Pakistan, and he
Okay.
didn't know English very well, and it was intense, and it got me out of my rut, depression
Wow.
rut. So
Yeah.
that was like kind of like oh, this works. Now, worked to my detriment later on down the road, but addiction numbs you out. It numbed my emotional pain.
I'm very familiar with that. I still struggle with a food addiction.
Me and you both.
And yeah. And the other thing is, though, especially you in other countries, that's dangerous,
Oh yeah, I
which you
didn't realize
already
it. I
know.
traveled
Yeah.
by myself too. All these adventures. I
Yeah.
loved traveling solo and just soaking up the culture and meeting local people and other travelers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was dangerous. My sex addiction really took off when United Airlines closed my office in Denver and moved me to Chicago, where their headquarters are. I didn't know a single soul when I moved there.
Mm.
But a few weeks beforehand in Denver, I discovered Craigslist, where you could post an
Oh,
ad or answer an ad for
right.
dating, quote unquote dating. It was all about sex.
Right.
And I hooked up
Right.
with a man and I was hooked. So I took that skill of getting on Craigslist to Chicago with me. And that was my social life, was these strange men.
And you're right. You're just kind of numbed out because all you're doing is thinking about the next ad, the next encounter. So you're all
Mhm.
caught up with that and not really in touch with yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think of all the pain that you're also trying to hold in because sooner or later, it's a journey that's going to have to be taken.
Hmm.
So you did that for 14 years and obviously you were good at it because 14 years is a long time to keep
It
in a
is.
position like that.
It is. And I loved it and I thrived and I did the leadership development program through United. And I ended up working with 1Ks, or men and women who flew over 100,000 miles a year.
Oh,
So I
wow.
would have these brilliant conversations with them about leadership. What does
Mm,
you think the best quality about that takes for a good leader, and what are your values? And I have these wonderful conversations with these people. So I'd
wow.
get their problems up front and then I would be fixing it while
Hmm.
multitasking while I had a conversation with them.
That sounds like a real school of learning from
Yeah,
these
it really
people.
was. Because I consider myself a leader also.
Hmm. Hmm.
A lot of my friends are in upper management, directors and CEOs, and I kind of
Hmm.
draw that to me.
Hmm.
People who know themselves and are able to lead with integrity and compassion.
Yeah, that's perfectly stated.
So
Yeah.
important. Oh, in this
And
world, so
yeah,
important.
it really is. And knowing yourself, I'm constantly learning new things about myself, the good, bad, the ugly, mistakes I know I've made or mistakes I'm making now, or being able to be open about how I handled a relationship and my part in it. So, and I know
Mhm.
you understand all that. You've lived it. So, after that position, why did you leave, and what was your next position?
Well, the reason I left is I took a 3 month sabbatical from United Airlines. I started getting hypomanic. This was in 2009.
Okay.
I took $9,000 out of my 401k. I went to LA for a social media convention at UCLA. I lost my mind completely. I spent $9,000 in a month and a half. I would buy groups of homeless
Uh,
people. I'd go to Village Inn and get to go packages. I was
oh
very
my
friendly.
gosh.
I was very friendly and giving in my mania, to the point where I couldn't tell who was dangerous and who was safe. And I ended up getting raped in a movie trailer off Santa Monica
Oh
Boulevard
my
from a
gosh.
man who befriended me that I couldn't see was dangerous at the time. And I was
You
manic and I was sexually assaulted. It was
oh my
awful.
God.
But I went back to Chicago after I was still on my sabbatical. I went into a deep, deep, dark depression. My father got in touch with me and said, "Me and your brother will go out and get you in Chicago if you give me the green light. Not until then. You have to want it." And I cried and I cried and I was going to lose everything and I knew it. But I was going to end up on the streets
Mm.
or prostituting again, which the sex addiction took me to, or my brother and my father were going to come out and get me and take me back to Colorado, which seemed like the worst thing at the time. But I took that route, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. My father saved my life.
Isn't that something?
The person who tormented me the most loved me so much.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes. Because I'm sitting here listening to this and I thought, you were so open about it and they loved you enough to be able to do that. That's just amazing. And then I think back when you're taking care of all of these other people, and I'm thinking, boy, she just has no self love. You're so
Mm.
busy loving everybody else, and you're discounting yourself. And then, when, of course, as we all know, when you're not present, you don't see the danger that's right in front of you.
Mm-mm.
Were you able to identify that person and
No.
press charge? Okay.
The policeman, as soon as I told him that I was bipolar, he just counted all of he
Oh.
walked me out the door of the police station and said, "Good luck to you." That was it. He was serious at first, but as soon as I told him I was bipolar, according to
Oh.
him, I think, I don't know, but it seemed to me like he thought I made the whole thing up. When I was in the hospital, I was very traumatized. I was out of my mind, hysterical. They didn't do a rape kit or anything. They just thought I was in my insanity.
Oh my gosh.
It was pretty traumatic. I've done a lot of therapy around it. Yeah, I had a manic episode when I was traveling to Italy also. And I was able to tell the people at my youth hostel, you need to call an ambulance because there's something wrong with my brain. And I was hallucinating, delusional, but I
Oh
was able
my
to see it,
God.
which is really a miracle.
It is.
I lost everything in Chicago. I lost everything in Rome. Everything I brought with me was lost except for the clothes on my back. My parents flew out to Italy and got me that time too.
Oh my
Isn't
gosh.
that something?
That is a beautiful thing. The hardest thing I think about dealing with trauma and being traumatized by certain people is that it's never black or white. It just never
Mhm.
is.
No,
If it was that easy, we all know what to do. But it's
exactly.
complicated, and
Yeah.
clearly there's love there.
And for the past 5 years, April, I've been in the psychology field as a peer specialist, and it's never black and white. We're dealing with human emotions.
Yeah.
And my coaching practice, Held to Happiness, has come out of a real desire to show people that they don't have to just settle for
Hmm.
learning how to manage their mental health and addiction, but that they can actually thrive and dream and go for what is in their heart or discover what is in their heart and live a value-driven life. And that's where I meet people where they're at in my coaching practice, Held to Happiness.
Hmm.
And we co-create new storylines that are strategic and improve their lives. It's an honor. I didn't do it. People run with it.
Yeah.
People co-create it. So,
I love that term co-create because I know you're a Christian and so am I. And whatever you believe in, as long as it's positive, I
mhm.
could care less. You just want people to, like you said, thrive. And this coaching program, share more about it because the one thing I think of as I'm continuing my journey is I would not be in a place where I could help people that are in so much pain. How are you
Mhm.
able to do that?
Well, basically, I'm not a therapist. I'm
Mm-hmm.
a mentor coach. So I can't help people process their emotions. But
Mm-hmm.
what I can do is bring them into the present and be future focused as well. So basically, I help those in recovery create and implement value driven success stories.
Okay.
What I have learned through having 4 executive coaches myself is that any pattern that you have in your life that you don't like, that you want to change, but you've tried millions of times to do it and it's still going nowhere, is like you're in a time capsule in the past, but you're trying to change the past. You're trying to change the storyline of something
Yeah.
that's already over and done with. You
Yeah.
can't change anything in the time capsule. So the best way to approach wanting to get out of it is figure out what you want to do next and
Right.
to create a map to get there and to implement it and to commit to something. Because
Wow.
if you keep going back to that time capsule, which someone with complex PTSD, I've done it trillions of times, I can't change that time capsule. And pardon my French, it's like putting a cat's tail in a rat's ass.
Right. Right.
But it really
You're
is.
right. It's
It
not going to
doesn't
work.
fit. Exactly.
Oh,
Pretty vivid,
God.
huh?
Yeah. Yeah. I got that picture in my head. It is so
An
true.
old spiritual teacher taught me that once. Her name was Patricia Collins. I don't know what happened to her, but
Well,
I hope well.
PTSD, I've had some episodes. I have dissociative amnesia. So there are years of my life that I don't remember or different incidents, and it's frightening. I understand that. I understand that. And one thing when you were saying on the other podcast, you and I was nodding my head, you're like, this is hard work. This is hard. And it is so true. It is
Yeah.
hard work, and you have to keep doing it.
And it's so worth it. It's so
Yes.
worth we're so
Yes.
worth it.
Yes.
That
Absolutely.
living in denial or
Yeah.
lying to ourselves, we
Yeah.
don't deserve that. We deserve to know who we are and to
Right.
live a beautiful life that we love. And is it perfect? No. We're
Yeah.
always going to remember this crap,
Right.
but to take off the charge to it
Yeah.
because what's in front of you is so wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's like your light shines so much that the darkness of the what's behind you is bleeded out with light. You can't
Oh,
even see it.
that is so true. It is so true. I've said in the past in other shows, it's like I don't want to scare people, but it's like it's work. You have to, just like anything else, you're going
Yeah.
to invest your time in. You're investing your time in yourself, in your mental wellness, and who you are as a human being. And it has to come first. All I have is enough energy for myself, and that has to be okay. For anybody else that may not understand, it's like I have to be able to be there for me. And I can't, there are certain things I'm not responsible for, and that's other people's well being.
Yeah.
It's
You
the whole
can't.
boundary thing.
The boundaries are great. Oh,
Hmm.
there's some really good books out there on boundaries.
You have siblings?
I have one brother. We're very close. He's my baby brother. He's doing really well. He broke the generational curse, which I am so proud of him. He never touched my nephew. He never hit my nephew, not even once.
Oh,
And I am
wow.
so proud of my brother.
That's wonderful.
God bless him and his whole family. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
That's
such a
huge.
good point. It is
Yeah.
huge. It
Yeah.
is very huge. It's interesting having a family. I never wanted to have kids. I never wanted to get married. And at this point, I was not consciously aware of my abuse. And then once I started digging and, start doing that work, I thought, well, no wonder I feel this way.
Mm-hmm.
It's was such that aspect of my life. And again, there are some beautiful things that were in my life too, but that's just the way things work. And while I stay positive, I do think about things maybe that if things were different, I could have had, a family but I think, okay, April, so if you did, then you wouldn't be here helping people and sharing your story and other people's story.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, this is just the way it is, trusting in my God to help guide me.
Yeah.
And I don't have my faith in humans. I
Faith
have
in
faith in,
Jesus. Yeah.
yeah, I have faith in my God. And for anybody else, whatever they believe, is something that's a positive force in your life, because we can't walk around alone.
No, we're not islands, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Connection is so important.
Yeah.
I see it with my clients. having connections with people and knowing you're not alone brings hope.
Mm-hmm.
Where there is life, there is hope. That's one of my mottos. I
I
learned
love
that from
that.
a sponsor of mine. I just wrote a book too called The Pit of Despair.
I was just about to mention that. The pit of despair.
Great
Yep.
one if you like.
Right? How God, prayer, and the 12 steps saved my life from addiction. So tell me about that major project. That's kudos to you. Congratulations for
Thank you so
getting
much, Nicole.
something major accomplished.
It is major. It's something that I'm pretty blown away with even today because I got my author's copies from the publisher. It's due out officially in in June. It's officially due out June 11th, 2024. However, if your audience wants a copy signed and sent, I can arrange that. You can put my
Okay.
email address.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So my book is about how my relationship with Christ and praying to God helped save my life from the hell of active addiction through working the 12-step program. I've been in 12-step program. I entered those rooms in 2007 because I had sex addiction and cocaine addiction going on. I was going to die if I continued along that path. And it literally saved my life. And those people, I felt so alone. I thought I was the only woman doing what I was doing. And I'll tell you what, April, when I got into my first 12-step room, it was me and 30 men. But you know what? As soon as one of them started sharing,
Yeah.
I didn't feel alone anymore. These were my people.
Wow. That's powerful. That is powerful because there is nothing like feeling alone in that kind of desperate pain that you think, what you've gone through is unique because it's so terrible.
It
And
is.
you wonder how are you going to make it?
And there was so much shame too.
Again, you're reading my mind because the shame surrounded by all of these things that people think you're just lazy, just get over it. Why are you being a victim? And it's like, but that's not the reality. You don't understand. There are, physical forces that cause the addictive behavior, and obviously with your bipolar.
Yeah, there's certainly a link of or a connection between emotional pain and taking that into our own hands to self medicate through substance.
Mm-hmm.
My book addresses, and I personally am on a mission to obliterate stigma about addiction because
Yes.
people in society think, oh, addicts are such bad people.
Yeah.
There are bad people who need to get good. And you know what? We're not bad people. We're
No.
sick people trying to get well. We're not bad people trying to get good.
Mm-hmm.
We're just sick. It's
Mm-hmm.
just like any other disease.
Especially now with the opioid epidemic
Mm.
and the epidemic of teenage suicidal thoughts, that people should be past that, but they're not. And that's just going to be an ongoing struggle in this society, is that mental illness is real. Addiction is real. If people had choices, you think people are going to choose that?
That's another thing. Like, I would feel so much shame around, like, for instance, my complex PTSD used to hold me up in my house for months on end. And I would have to call in sick and use Family Medical Leave Act. And I was crying to a friend because every time I called in sick, I felt so much shame. And I was talking to a friend, and my friend said to me, are you doing this to yourself on purpose? I said, no. And he said, show yourself some grace. So
Mm,
that's one thing I tell people is, did you become an addict on purpose? No. Give yourself
yeah.
give yourself a break then. You didn't do this on purpose. Nobody
Right.
would. And you know what? You can't get out of it by yourself. You need help. You need your higher powers help. God, Buddha, Allah,
Right.
whatever you want to call, whatever's
Right.
bringing light and love into your life.
Right.
And you need the help of other people because God works through other people.
Absolutely.
And there's hope for everyone.
Yes,
That's
there
another
is.
thing is like,
There is.
there's hope. And I like to hold hope for people who have none.
Yes.
You know.
Without hope, and I know with my depression, there are those moments when I think I will not be able to climb out of this hole. I am as whole and being swallowed. And then, I have to start praying, and it's a matter of time that I can come out of it. And that's why I always think people give yourself time. Like you said, give yourself grace. Just wait. Just wait, because you will be able to feel better. It is temporary. That feeling is temporary.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard when you're in it. It's hard when you're in it.
You want a permanent solution to it. And
Yeah.
a lot of people just see suicide as the only solution.
Yeah.
And because I've been there, I was on the verge of attempting suicide in Chicago. Talk about angels in the form of humans. I started to have an image of a gun in my head, and I went to my car, and I'd had it for weeks. It was in my head.
Yeah.
So I went to my car, and right before I turned my car on, I got a phone call, and I answered it. And it was this wonderful woman, this African-American woman who worked for United Airlines for our EAP, which is Employee Assistant Program. And she had gotten to know me, and she hadn't heard from me for a while. And I had been numb for weeks, just numb with this idea of a gun. I was on my way I would have started my car up to go to the pawn shop when she called. She saved my life. This woman talked me into, instead of going to the pawn shop, she talked me into driving myself to the hospital. And I committed to doing that. And I did. That woman saved my life that day.
That is
That was
good.
God working through her.
And you answered the phone.
Yeah.
You
That's a
answered the
miracle.
phone.
I did it like knee-jerk reaction,
I still marvel at how similar in certain ways our stories are, because I took leave for mental health reasons. There are a lot of problems at work anyway. But while I was still working and talking to a friend, and she said, "Why don't you take leave? You can do that." I'm like, "I can?" I mean, it didn't even occur to me that I could do something like that. Honestly, I wouldn't have never. She said, "Make those calls." And she was right. I was like, oh my God. My therapist can write a letter or whatever. Every now and then I'll mention that to her. And she's so surprised. And I said, look, we're not really in each other's lives. We just stay in touch, Facebook and stuff. But I told her, you don't know how important that was.
Yeah.
I could not see clearly. And you just said, take some time off.
Well, yeah, because you break a leg and it's visible, but people are mentally not feeling good or mentally sick. You can't see it. It's an invisible disease.
Oh,
so we feel bad about it because society's stigma is pull up your bootstraps and go to work.
Right. Well, get it together. Sick. Yeah.
I felt so much shame calling in sick every time I did. But I was a sick woman. I needed help. And I thank God that it was there. I had to reach out for it.
Yeah.
That's some courage too, to reach out for help.
It does. It truly does. I am just so loving our conversation and loving your vulnerability and honesty. And I know all that is for yourself and for other people that are suffering, or we're dealing with this on a daily basis. It's not something that you won't ever have to deal with. You don't want it to be the forefront of your life, but you do have to do things to be consistent and to stay healthy, just like your physical self, your spiritual self. I've always felt through the years of going through different therapists, I always felt there is a spiritual component missing. And once I figured that out for myself, and I realized, of course, there is that side of it too.
Mm-hmm. That's why, like, I used to think, like, people, I'd go out and I'd be like, oh my gosh, they're laughing at me, if the group of people that I didn't even know. I'm like, I'm not the center of everybody's universe. That's the self-centeredness
Yes.
aspect of being an addict, is thinking you're
Right.
you're the center of the universe in a negative light. You know, there are some people who think it in the positive. Well, it's not even positive.
Right.
I'm all that, and
That whole
everyone
narcissistic thing. Yeah.
Yeah, narcissism, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I
No,
could talk with you for a few episodes, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Stay tuned to part 8 of my interview with Lisa Jo. Oh, is there anything else you want to touch on, or anything else that you want to add to this beautiful interview with you?
It is a beautiful interview, and thank you for that, April. I just want to invite your listeners to pick up a copy of my book, Pit of Despair, and also to invite them to sign up for a free 20-minute coaching session to see if it's something that they would like to do.
Great. I'll have all of that on my platform, so
great.
people can link to that. And I'll ask people to tell me what you think about this interview. Maybe we can have Lisa Jo back for some more discussions about a million other topics in this world. So, Lisa Jo, I send you blessings, and I feel God has brought us together. And to all my listeners, is do what you need to do for yourself, that you come first, and whatever else is in your life, whatever you believe in, you hold on to that for you. You don't have to please anybody else. Thank you, my dear.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, April.
Thank you for joining me today on Living in Midbloom. I hope you found this episode insightful, meaningful, and maybe it's given you something to think about. I invite you to share your positive reviews or ideas on topics you would like me to touch on by leaving your comments on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Castbox, Podchaser, or Podcast Addict. We are all divine beings who just want to be seen, heard, and loved. Have a beautiful day.